I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Welcome back, everyone. It's the President's Guy, and we're doing another reaction video today. And this one we're going to be doing Ben Shapiro's top 7 presidential scandals. I haven't seen this video. I actually didn't even know about it until the other day when I was doing the video from Crunchy History's biggest presidential scandals, and I came across this and just looking for different stuff. So interesting to see what he's going to have to say here. My prediction up front is, of course, being Ben Shapiro, it's going to be probably heavily leaning into Democrats. But from his presidential tier ranking and all the other videos we've seen from him, I don't expect a lot of neutrality. I expect a lot of bias. But let's see what he's got.
Alrighty, folks, there are a lot of presidents who have been involved in a lot of scandals. Today, we're going to go through the top 7 presidential scandals of all time. This video...
And that's true. There have been a lot of scandals, but it's important to differentiate because I'm reading Ron Chernow's biography on Ulysses Grant, and then after that I'm going to be reading Josiah Bunting III's on. There's a U.S. Presidents series from the American Presidents. So I'm reading the Grant book just as I'm doing research for the Civil War stuff and just general presidential history. And one thing they talk about in here is the credit mobilier. I'm not saying it right. The credit mobilier scandal. And essentially that's one involving actually both of Grant's vice presidents, but had nothing to do with him. But because it happens under his administration, he gets lumped in with it. And even up until 20, 30 years ago, historians would blame him, but he had nothing to do with it, and he was completely vindicated. But it's easy to lump that in with him because there were so many other scandals and corruptions during and within his administration. And because he was the president, he suffered for it. So it's important to note that just because a scandal happens under a president, that they're not necessarily involved. That doesn't mean that they're not either.
Video sponsored by Birch Gold.
I'm sure what that is. Now, from that intro, it appears that this may be more bipartisan than I think it is. So we'll see.
Alrighty, folks, so to make this interesting, we're going to go in reverse order of scandal. There are going to be some surprises in here for you. So why don't we begin with the scandal that ranks number 7 on the list of presidential scandals? Not number 7 in terms of interest level. In terms of interest level, it might be number 1. But in terms of actual scandalousness of the scandal, Lewinsky Gate ranks...
I would say that's probably the most well-known presidential scandal. And Clinton's certainly not the only president to have extramarital affairs. JFK had them. Grover Cleveland had them. Franklin Roosevelt had them. The list could go on and on. But it's definitely, if you think presidential scandals and you talk to the average American, this would probably be the one that they bring up to you.
At number 7. And the reason Lewinsky Gate doesn't rank higher is because it may not even be the worst Clinton scandal. It turns out that China Gate, about campaign funding in the 1996 election, may have been worse. It turns out that...
And I don't know a ton about that particular scandal, as I haven't read a bunch on Clinton, but Citizens United probably, had that happened beforehand, probably would have rendered that a non-starter.
Travelgate, in which the Clintons came in and just fired everybody in the travel office for political reasons. Whitewater, selling...
Interesting. Again, I would love to see how this would rank if this happened now, because that's kind of what Trump and Doge are doing, is just going through the government and just lampooning people. Clinton did it. W. Bush did it when he first came in. So it's not an abnormal practice for a new administration to come in and gut the government, but you have to look at why they're doing it and what is the aims of it.
Selling pardons for money. Like, the Clintons were totally filled with scandal those days. But Lewinsky Gate was, of course, the most highly publicized presidential scandal of its time because of the newly risen internet. So you'll recall that in June of 1995, Monica Lewinsky was an intern at the White House as an unpaid intern in the office of Leon Panetta, who was then the chief of staff. In November of 1995, after she flashed her thong at him, apparently, they started a secret sexual relationship. Linda Tripp was Monica Lewinsky's friend, and she realized that what was going on was rather historic. She started taping the conversations.
Which, depending on the states that they were in at the time, that could be of various legality. And I would have to read into this scandal more, because a lot of times this kind of smoking gun evidence may end up being determined to be admissible in court. because it was collected through nefarious means. I'm not certain one way or the other, but there's always those kind of little technical details that can throw a wrench into an investigation.
Didn't have sex, Linda. Well, what do you call it? We fooled around.
By December of that year, Monica Lewinsky had moved into a paid position in the Office of Legislative Affairs and was ferrying mail and other things to the Oval Office. All of this ended up breaking out into the open in 1998 because Monica Lewinsky was subpoenaed by lawyers for Paula Jones. Paula Jones, of course, had accused the president of sexual assault in a civil suit before he was president of the United States, and he had basically claimed that he had had no more affairs of this type, and Lewinsky ended up being subpoenaed. Lewinsky filed an affidavit in January of 1998 in which she denied ever having some sort of sexual relationship with Clinton. This,
which is perjury on both of their parts.
Of course, was a lie. A couple of days later, Linda Tripp delivered the tapes to her own lawyer, and then a couple of days after that, Linda Tripp contacted Whitewater Independent Counsel Ken Starr to talk about Lewinsky and the tapes that she made of their conversations. This all broke out in the open late January, after Newsweek apparently had the scoop but was hesitant about running it. Matt Drudge got a hold of the story, and he ran the story instead. A bunch of news organizations denied this was the case. Of course, it ended up being the case, and then Clinton went on national TV and said,
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Remember that one? And he was lying because Bill Clinton...
Now, it's important to note, it's not illegal to lie, but it's illegal to lie under oath.
Is a horrific horn dog and liar.
I like sex. I like hot, stinky sex, all right?
Eventually, all of this ended with Bill Clinton being impeached in the House, but not convicted in the Senate. He was impeached
over the dumbest stuff. And this is kind of the precursor to what is probably going to be a more, unfortunately, repetitious cycle of presidents getting impeached for minor offenses.
Not on the grounds that he had banged an intern, but he was impeached on the grounds of perjury because he had lied about it. He tried to claim that it would all rested on what the definition of is.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is.
Or whether oral sex was, in fact, a form of sex. Major scandal at the time. The reality is that obstruction of justice was probably the right charge for Bill Clinton because he was effectively suborning perjury from a bunch of people around him. But it ends up basically destroying Clinton's credibility for the last couple of years of his administration, despite the fact that it was seen as sort of backfiring on Republicans. Al Gore ends up losing the 2000 election largely because of Monica Lewinsky. Yep.
I would disagree with that. I think Al Gore loses because ultimately Americans are people of cycles. No matter how good or bad a president is, people just sometimes want change. And Al Gore, for as much as people like him and how good of a president he may or may not have been, he just didn't excite people. You know, go back and watch the debates with Gore and Bush. Bush isn't the smartest man in the world, but I mean, he pretty roundly beats Gore, at least in two of the debates. Just because Gore is kind of the way Tim Walz was in the vice presidential debates last year. He just kind of cracked under the pressure.
The other problem here is that when we're talking about affairs in the White House, like at least 9 that I can count had affairs while they were in the White House. And that, of course, includes JFK, who's way worse than Bill Clinton. Way, way worse. I understand that we're all supposed to pretend JFK was a wonderful person. JFK nailed anything within a 300-foot radius. We talk about Bill Clinton and Monica.
It's funny because it's so true.
Lewinsky going after the interns. Monica was 21. Mimi Alford was 19. And JFK invited her to like the White House pool. And she was like, well, should I go to I don't have a bathing suit. He's like, don't worry, I have some here. And she ended up in the White House swimming pool with a couple of other interns and JFK. He then took her up to a room in the White House where he took her virginity, according to her memoirs. JFK, of course, was nailing everybody from Marilyn Monroe to like girlfriends of Chicago gangsters. And that all never made it to the public eye, even though the media knew full well about it because the media were protecting him. So, you know, as far as where...
And I'd have to look into some of those, but he definitely was doing that. Up until that point, and I don't know exactly when this kind of changed, probably around Watergate, the media was actually fairly cooperative with the president. Like, the media knew that FDR couldn't walk. They just didn't run the story because he asked them not to. And they didn't. That would never happen now.
Where Bill Clinton even ranks among the horn dogs in office, Bill Clinton is at least number 2 in that category. JFK is an easy number 1. But LBJ was there too. I mean, like, there are a bunch of them.
Yeah, LBJ.
Okay, number 6, you have to go all the way back in time to the U.S. Grant administration for the Credit Mobilier scandal.
We just talked about that.
This one is, for fans of history, a big scandal, but for everybody else, never heard of it. Ulysses S. Grant has been unfairly tarnished as someone who is okay with corruption and cronyism, but the reality is that Credit Mobilier really had nothing to do with Ulysses S. Grant. Had to do with...
And Grant was actually one of the first presidents to even attempt civil service reform. He eventually kind of gave up on it just because he realized he wasn't going to succeed, and he kind of just worked within the system he had, but he was the first one. I think it was around 1872 where he writes an executive order trying to have a more merit-based system.
Other members of his administration. So essentially, the Union Pacific Railroad was being built, and it was being built on the back of Credit Mobilier of America. It was part of a complex arrangement where basically a few people in government were directing all sorts of money to a few particular magnates who were building the Union Pacific Railroad.
It was basically a shell company. It's kind of the way you just saw Elon Musk use one of his companies to buy Twitter. Basically, there was a fake company ran by the same people running the Union Pacific Railroad, and they were basically just funneling government money from the shell company to their own pockets. And this certainly isn't the first or last time anything like this has happened, but it was involving vice presidents, multiple. So it was a big deal.
They were basically impoverishing the public for their own personal aggrandizement. It ended up with the censuring of a congressperson named Oakes Ames, who's a congressman from Massachusetts. Several other people, including the vice president of the United States, were absolved of involvement, but may indeed have been involved. This ranks in at number...
Schuyler Colfax, who was Grant's first vice president, I want to say Henry Wilson, who ended up becoming his vice president in the second term, which actually helped Grant out because he was from Maine or Massachusetts, so it was a more... because Grant's from Ohio and Schuyler Colfax was from Indiana, so it was a very Midwestern ticket, so it kind of helped him diversify with the electorate.
Number 7, because it did tarnish unfairly Ulysses S. Grant's presidency. Grant is actually one of our better presidents, and historians now are reevaluating his presidency.
That's why he's on the wall. I love Ulysses Grant, my second favorite president behind Abraham Lincoln.
Was growing up, Ulysses S. Grant was considered one of our worst presidents. Now, a lot of historians have him in the top 10, largely because of this. Okay, number 5, Huntergate. So, this is only because we haven't established, the final details of Huntergate. If we establish the final details, which is money moving directly into Joe Biden's account, Huntergate is actually way higher on this list.
Which there is absolutely zero proof of. Congressional Republicans were unable to find any misdoing on Joe Biden's part. Now, Hunter, different story, but in terms of Joe Biden, there's no evidence other than the hint in a text message referring to the big guy that Joe Biden was involved in any way, shape, or form with any of his son's shady business dealings, whether or not they were shady.
Especially because it's going to implicate a sitting president of the United States, and it's going to implicate him in open foreign corruption when he was vice president of the United States.
I'm going to get in trouble. I feel it coming.
For those who haven't been following Huntergate, here's a brief synopsis. Hunter Biden is the president of the United States' derelict, drug-addicted, whore-addicted son. And all he does for...
Not only that, but he ended up sleeping with his dead brother's wife. Not, hopefully he's turning his life around, but there was a point in time where just not a good human being at all.
Living is travel around to foreign countries picking up bags of cash by using his daddy's last name. This part is full.
Now that's probably true.
Fully known and acknowledged. The only question is whether those bags of cash were done with Joe Biden's permission. We now have good evidence by Devin Archer, who's the business partner of Hunter Biden, that Joe was literally calling into business meetings. We know full well that Joe Biden was squiring Hunter Biden around. We know that Joe Biden was presiding over Ukrainian foreign policy and getting prosecutors...
He was presiding over Ukrainian foreign policy. There's a really good series of books. If you want to read about Joe Biden, there's a few books you should read, but one of them is Joe Biden, The Life, the Run, and What Matters Now by Evan Osnos. And this actually talks about when he was vice president, how he disagreed with Obama on what to do with Ukraine, around the Crimea event in 2011, 2012. He wanted to send minimal money and not really help them at all because he didn't think the United States should be involved. Very different from where he would end up being as the president. But then the definitive biography, at least for right now on Joe Biden, is Jules Wickover's, and they actually did an updated version. I think this goes up until 2020. So read either one of these. Pretty good biographies on Joe Biden.
Fired at a time when those prosecutors in Ukraine were looking at a company where Hunter Biden was on the board.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
So all that's really left there is to dot a few final I's and cross a few final T's, and this rises on the scale of scandalous behavior because obviously the sitting vice president of the United States receiving money from a foreign country in order to impact foreign policy is really, really bad. But
is it, one, again, there's no solid proof that Biden did that, or they'd be all over him right now. Two, Trump 100% pressured Ukraine by withholding aid to them to finger Joe Biden for doing anything bad, which is 100% a crime and one he was impeached for.
But we have to wait for sort of final confirmation. When we get final confirmation, this one is going to rise to at least number 4, maybe number 3. Chappaquiddick. So Chappaquiddick would be higher on this list, except for the fact that Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy at the time, was a senator and not president of the United States. All of these other scandals are going to involve presidents of the United States and the White House. The reason this was so important is because it probably finally destroyed the credibility of sort of our political justice system entirely. Senator Ted Kennedy was the heir apparent in the Kennedy family. So first it was JFK, JFK gets assassinated. Then it was Bobby, Bobby gets assassinated. Next in line is clearly Ted. Ted is sort of a ne'er-do-well son who ends up a senator of Massachusetts because his brothers keep getting assassinated, which is tragic and horrifying. But here is Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy is an incompetent. Ted Kennedy is a habitual drunk.
And he's one who challenges Carter for the Democratic primary in 1980. Kind of, in almost the way that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. now, for whatever you may think of him, is the black sheep of the Kennedy family. Ted was sort of that in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
And he's a womanizer, and he ends up,
like most of the Kennedys,
driving a woman with whom he was presumably having an affair, Mary Jo Kopechne, off of a bridge in Chappaquiddick. He apparently accidentally made a wrong turn onto a dirt road, leading to a one-lane bridge, and then he proceeds to crash the car off the bridge into the water. He rolls down his window and leaves the car. She is in the back seat of the car for a reason no one can discern. She ends up drowning in what is a fairly shallow river. He swims to safety. He goes to somebody else's house. He beds down for the night. And the next morning he says, oh, maybe I should call the cops about this. By which point, Mary Jo Kopechne is super dead. Her death could have happened at any time between about 11:30 p.m. Friday and 1 a.m. on Saturday. It's unclear when that happened or how long she was alive in the car. There's actually a very good movie that they made about Chappaquiddick that is worth the watch. Kennedy then pretended that he'd been badly hurt in the crash. He tried to play victim, and he
almost like a wrestling promoter. He's wearing the comical neck brace to try to elicit sympathy. I have to give Shapiro credit. This is a fairly balanced list, outside of the Biden stuff, because that's still recent and it's obviously his bias feeding in. But this is a pretty well balanced list. I have to give him credit.
Ended up getting a 2-month suspended jail sentence. Now, if you or I drove off a bridge with a woman in the back and then left her to die in the back of the car, and then swam to safety and didn't call the cops until the next morning, at that point, you would go to jail for manslaughter at the very least. Senator Kennedy ended up not even going to jail at all because this, of course, was Martha's Vineyard, and you're allowed to get away with that sort of thing. A judicial inquest in 1970 concluded that Kennedy and Kopechne did not intend to take the ferry, and that Kennedy intentionally turned toward the bridge, operating his vehicle negligently. He was probably drunk beyond all measure. That's probably the reason he didn't call the cops, by the way, is because the minute he calls the cops, they realize he's driven off a bridge, drunk, and killed a lady. And so you wait until the next morning, and it's out of your system. At a court hearing, Kennedy then said that his accident made no sense to me, and he regarded his failure to report the accident immediately as indefensible. He had his driver's license suspended for 16 months for all of this. This is a major scandal because it basically destroys the Kennedy family's chances at the presidency. Also because, again, it demonstrates to the public that if your last name is Kennedy, or as it turns out Clinton, or as it turns out Biden, you can get away with pretty much anything. This is the worst sweetheart deal in American history, bar none. The only one that's even competitive right now is probably Hunter Biden's sweetheart deal that just got blown up by the judge in that particular case. By the way,
again, insane heavy Democrat bias. But he's right. The Chappaquiddick thing is oh my God, I haven't seen that movie, but it is abysmal. I wouldn't call it a presidential scandal. It just involves the president's, brother. But horrible, indefensible. Ted Kennedy was never going to be the president regardless, but it definitely was another step in the downhill spiral for the Kennedy family, and one that they may or may not ever recover from. I think as of right now, Joe Kennedy III is probably the only contender they have in the Kennedy family that might do something in the future. So we'll kind of see where that goes.
By the way, it does not stop Ted Kennedy from then later running for president and almost winning the nomination in 1980 against Jimmy Carter.
Which was sort of the early indicator that Carter wasn't going to win the election.
Number 3, Watergate. Now, some people are going to be like, well, why isn't Watergate higher on the list? And the answer is because other candidates had actually bugged their opponent's headquarters. LBJ, during the 1964 race, openly and pretty clearly bugged Barry Goldwater's campaign headquarters. This was actually the way that things were done at the time. Doesn't justify it. The cover-up was worse than the crime, as everybody basically acknowledged. The Watergate break-in was June 17th, 1972, at the Watergate office building. 5 perpetrators.
And I've always found Watergate incredibly interesting. Nixon was, like LBJ, they're very similar people, were incredibly paranoid. There was no shot at all that Nixon was going to lose the 72 election. And you look, I think he won all but 1 or 2 states. I mean, to that time, the biggest electoral landslide up until Reagan. I mean, it just blows everything out of the water. But he was so paranoid, he's doing this kind of stupid stuff. And he's documenting it all while it's happening.
Were arrested. The press and DOJ connected the cash found on them to the Committee for the Re-election of the President, and witnesses testified that Nixon had actually approved the plans in the first place, and there was a voice-activated taping system in the Oval Office. 18 minutes is missing of that tape. People always suspected that is the 18 minutes where Nixon basically greenlit the operation. All this led to a constitutional crisis because the Attorney General was unwilling to basically kill the case, and so he got fired by Nixon in what was called the Saturday Night Massacre.
Which is an incredible feat of integrity. Willing to investigate your boss because you know it's the right thing to do.
Eventually, Nixon was forced to resign when the Senate of the United States decided that he could no longer serve and he was in danger of serious impeachment and conviction. It's kind of amazing, again, that...
And I think the Senate probably would have removed him. I really think that would have happened.
Nixon felt the necessity to do this since he won 49 states against George McGovern in one of the great presidential landslides in American history. This has become sort of the defining tale of presidential corruption, but that's really weird because, again, on the list of things that presidents have done that are super corrupt and terrible, this one does not rank particularly highly. It's just that he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar and then resigned. Now, in today's world, would a president resign for this? Absolutely not.
No.
If this were Bill Clinton, he doesn't resign. If this is Barack Obama, no way in hell he resigns. If it's Joe Biden, no way in hell he resigns. Just not going to happen. But back in those...
Or Trump.
...days... There's still the idea that, if you got caught with your hand in the cookie jar, then you had to resign. Okay, number 2. So this one, the fact that the media keep proclaiming that Barack Obama is pure as the driven snow is beyond me. That his only scandal is a tan suit, it's just nonsense. During Barack Obama's presidency, he literally used the IRS to target his political opponents. That's
No, he didn't. He did not. You can look into this yourself. He did not. At all. And people on the right... And again, it's bias, and hey, I'm biased, I'm a liberal, and I admit that freely. But he did not do it. Plain and simple. It's just a fact of life. The sun's going to rise tomorrow, and Obama did not target people with the IRS.
Insane.
I don't care if you're a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, or a Republican. This should send a chill up your spine.
So Lois Lerner presided over all this. There was no clear order from Barack Obama to Lois Lerner, cut all the nonprofits, but he had spoken publicly about why they should be cut, and then she just kind of picked up the baton and ran with it. Every Tea Party nonprofit.
And again, for a list that doesn't even mention, so at least to this point, Iran-Contra, and where the big de facto question there was, did Reagan know about it? The president saying something, and then someone running with it without being instructed to do it, does not constitute a crime. There have been plenty of instances in history where people... And a great example, William Sherman, at the end of the Civil War, when he's supposed to negotiate the surrender of Joe Johnston's army, Grant says, use the same terms as Appomattox. And Sherman goes way too far and talks about bringing the southern states back into the Union under all these terms that he didn't have the authority to meet, and Grant has to rescind that. And they have to kind of start all over. And that's someone overreaching an order. This is someone doing something out of their own, based on the interpretation of something that they heard. So people can make their own decisions. That doesn't make the people above them responsible.
Nonprofit basically came under scrutiny. In June of 2011, the Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp sent a letter to former IRS Commissioner Schulman saying the IRS appears to have selectively targeted certain taxpayers engaged in political speech. There must have been communications because literally thousands of emails from Lois Lerner's computers went missing. Magically, poof, they are gone. The IRS attempted to recover Lerner's hard drive to no avail. In March of 2012, the Republican House Oversight Committee Chairman Darrell Issa expressed concerns the IRS Inspector General, the Tea Party groups were being unfairly targeted by the agency. Doug Shulman, the IRS Commissioner, when the targeting program got underway, denied that to lawmakers. In July of 2012, ISA requested the Inspector General audit the IRS. The IRS Inspector General wrote a letter to ISA confirming an audit was underway. By 2013, Lois Lerner was warning colleagues to be cautious about what we say in emails. In 2013, this is when it finally erupted.
Which is a typical thing you would say when there's an investigation going on. You need to consult your lawyer. That's just standard practice.
That the IRS had in fact been targeting all of Barack Obama's political opponents. And then Obama said that this was inexcusable.
I've got no patience with it. I will not tolerate it, and we will make sure that we find out exactly what happened on this.
Which is the responsible thing to do. Because if this was something he was involved in, first thing you do is just deny it and say, I had nothing to do with it, and blah, blah, blah. But he's saying that this is unacceptable behavior. We'll look into this, and anyone involved will be punished. People can overstep their bounds. There is no evidence that Barack Obama ordered this to happen. Period. There are too many people in the government. Here's one thing y'all just have to realize. There's always a whistleblower. And all of these things, there are hundreds of thousands of people that work in the United States government. There's always someone who's going to blow the whistle. This is too big of an operation for someone not to know and someone not to try to save their own ass by, convicting someone else by giving information. And that's just the way of the world.
All of this was a lie. Lois Lerner, who was lower down at the IRS, ended up basically taking a paid retirement. Obama then told Bill O'Reilly in 2014 there was not a smidgen of corruption at the IRS.
There were some boneheaded decisions out of a
but
local
no mass
office.
corruption.
Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Okay.
In the end, by 2017, when Donald Trump had taken office, the DOJ settled with plaintiffs' groups that were improperly targeted by the IRS. In 2015, a joint investigation by the DOJ and FBI found substantial evidence of mismanagement, poor judgment, and institutional inertia, but no evidence that any IRS official acted based on political, discriminatory, corrupt, or other inappropriate motives that would support a criminal prosecution. That, of course, was cover-up by the DOJ and the FBI, who were being run at the time by...
And then what would be the first thing that would happen when Trump takes office? He would have the DOJ, he would have the FBI look into it. So either he didn't do that because there was nothing to find, or he did and they didn't find anything, because if they did, Trump would have been screaming from the rooftops about this, and he never talks about it because Obama wasn't involved.
Remember, Barack Obama. The IRS scandal, totally underrated scandal in American political history. And then number one is Russiagate. By far. The Russiagate...
It's the most recent. Biggest is subjective to your own interpretation, I suppose.
Scandal has just grown and grown in terms of the size and importance it takes on in American political life. In 2015, 2016, Hillary Clinton targeted Donald Trump. Fusion GPS, which was a firm hired by her legal team, put together the so-called Steele dossier. Then they attempted to launder this via Barack Obama's FBI into a giant years-long investigation that consumed not only parts of the 2016 election, but the entirety of Donald Trump's presidency. It led to the idiotic Mueller Commission. It led to claims by Adam Schiff that Donald Trump was a Russian tool. It led to the DOJ and the FBI bogging down Donald Trump and everyone around him with...
Mueller and James Comey were Republicans. So they had every reason to back Trump. And if you read the Mueller report, he doesn't... his whole conclusion was, we're not going to do anything here, but this looks pretty bad. And Trump, at least in his campaign, whether he was directly involved or not, his campaign 100% colluded with Russia. You don't have to look very far into his behavior in 2020, where he's on the phone asking for votes, to see that he's capable of that kind of thing. Whether he directly did or not, his campaign was 100% involved with Russia. There's no debating that at all.
Subpoenas and legal cases for literally years on end. This entire investigation was launched on the very slim read that a low-level foreign policy aide named George Papadopoulos had a conversation in a bar with an Australian about how he had heard that the Russians were pitching material to the Trump campaign.
There's literally video of Trump saying, "Hey, Russia, help us out."
There are apparently over 500,000 articles published about Russia and Trump during the 22 months of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. The Washington Post and New York Times...
That's not surprising. Well, most of the time you read a headline, you could find the same headline over 9 or 10 news articles that same day. So that's not that hard to believe. There are plenty of other instances where a bunch of things get written, because that's just how the news cycle works, the 24-hour news cycle. They've got to keep recycling things. And they did beat this horse to death on many, many times over.
Times ended up winning Pulitzers for their coverage of the scandal. All of this is a black mark on the FBI, a black mark on the DOJ. It destroyed institutional trust in both organizations. The mainstream media, which declared that Donald Trump was a cat's paw of the Russians, simultaneously ignored.
I think finding out things like all the stuff that happens under J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI is one thing that destroys people's faith in institutions. It's not this. But yes, it certainly didn't help people's faith in institutions.
Ignoring everything with regard to Hillary Clinton and overtly covering up scandals like the Hunter Biden laptop and Huntergate. All of that led to the decline of credibility of the media. It is hard to think of a scandal that has broken more institutions in the United States than the...
There was a study found that even if the Hunter laptop situation had come out before the 2020 election, that it wouldn't have affected the results at all.
Gate scandal, which was a non-scandal because, again, it was really a scandal about the Obama administration, not a scandal about the Trump administration. It was about how Obama worked with Hillary Clinton, worked with the DOJ, worked with the FBI to target Hillary Clinton's political opponent in a presidential election and then stretch that beyond the election into the presidency of Donald J. Trump. So there you have it, the top government scandals in American history.
I find it interesting that every time there's a Democrat involved, there's no way that they're innocent. But with Trump, it's always innocent. And again, I'm very biased, and I admit that freely. But I really would like to think I'm a pretty objective viewer of the world. And the Russiagate thing, at this point, is the least of Trump's sins. But it's the simple fact of the matter that Shapiro... And I tell people, go look at the time when he was on Real Time with Bill Maher, around 2017 or 18. I think it was around the time that Trump was getting, not Kavanaugh, but his Supreme Court nominee before then. And he talks about how he didn't vote for Trump because he was afraid of what he was going to do. And then Trump kind of becomes the de facto head of the Republican Party ever since then. And now he just kowtows to him. The same way that Rubio and Cruz did and after the primaries in 2016, and then they bend over backwards for him now. And it's certainly something that happens on the Democratic spectrum as well. But you can tell that when it gets to modern history, especially, Ben Shapiro loses any semblance of objectivity. And it's just complete one-sided viewership because he's saying things here that are just objectively not true. So let me know what you guys thought about that. I'm sure I'm going to piss a lot of you off with this video and a lot of things I've had to say. But that's fine. Let's try to have a civil conversation in the comments. I generally don't try to delete any, but if anything's profane or just outright combative, there's no reason for that, and I'm not going to leave it there. So please disagree. But please do so civilly. That's the point of this channel, is to be a learning community. So let me know what you thought about that. What are some of your biggest presidential scandals, especially some that didn't make it into this list? Did you learn about any new ones? Let me know down below. Until next time, guys, never stop learning.